introduced and put into perspective. And it's going to be quite a legalistic presentation and kind of a seminar teaching style. So the thing is that I think at the level of ASEAN, we are always talking at the state-to-state level, or in terms of high-level elites, right? The policymakers, the political decision makers, and then for the rest of us, the ASEAN people, we think that, oh, okay, well, we've not seen its impact, we've not seen its advantages, why do we even bother? Obviously, some politicians, some policymakers maybe think that, okay, let's participate in this ASEAN community, but we also are not so invested in it. I've been working on ASEAN for 15 years, and I'm still very interested and still very invested in it, because this is the region that we live in, right? And if we don't invest in it, if we don't work on it, there's no future for us, for our future generations, our children, our grandchildren, and so on and so forth. So just to start off, the rules-based ASEAN community, so 2025, right? So the ASEAN Charter, as we heard this morning, set in place this rule of law for ASEAN moving forward. This is all 10 of us. This, and this map shows that Singapore actually has, has come past Indonesia, and this really shows. I mean, like, the rest of the world doesn't care about ASEAN, and if we don't take an interest in ourselves, right, in terms of like a map, too bad, too late, right? And too late, here comes, the Eminent Persons Group report. When we adopted prior to the adoption of the ASEAN Charter, they said, ASEAN must cohere together. We must have a rule of law community moving forward. We must comply with our rules. We must comply with our laws across all the three communities, right? Because we need to have a future. And also, if we are going to have a future, we have to be realistic. Economics drives the region, and ASEAN, this region, needs to compete with China and India, right? So where are we? ASEAN Community 2025, what are its benefits? So this came from the ASEAN website. So political security community hasn't changed very much in terms of its outreach and outlook, peace, stability, and prosperity, ASEAN centrality in our regional engagement with external actors, right? So in matters of South China Sea or other types of dialogues, we maintain our central position, or we try to maintain our position as fulcrum. The economic community, of course, we all want everybody, all 10 member states and the peoples of the member states to prosper. And this will be done through our economic integration. So they've changed the terminology slightly from the AEC 2015 blueprint, which was single market and production based. Now the 2025 AEC blueprint says we need to be well integrated into the global economic system, we need to be business friendly, trade facilitative, and so on and so forth. And we need to be high value added. So this takes into account the changes in the global economy, high value added, socio-cultural, and I think this is very important for all of us, like me as an ordinary citizen. Yes, people-oriented, people-centered, but in the in the ASEAN Community ASCC blueprint of 2015, although it was focused on the ASEAN people, but the emphasis in the 2025 blueprint is much more nuanced, and there is this quality of life and equitable access to opportunities, social development, and environmental protection. And down here, they even say, this is for the people. So there's really a much more marked emphasis on us as ASEAN citizens, as the people of ASEAN. So ASEAN now has, well, the community now has 5 pillars, as opposed to 2015, which was 4 pillars only. And to make a comparison, where are the main differences, or where is the main difference? So the main difference is that we are moving, or we are concentrating because of the global, waves of development, enhanced connectivity, and ICT, so on and so forth. right? Global ASEAN, that's external relations, everything remains more or less the same, but there is a lot more emphasis on the people and on, you know, on the modern economy. Right, but let me just but when we go back to the ASEAN rules-based community, law is not new to ASEAN. It has always been there, right? We were set up in 1967, but our first real hard law came in 1976, right? And to implement the law, the ASEAN Secretariat was also, you know, established. So the agreement to establish the ASEAN Secretariat was also adopted in 1976 in Bali, in the famous Bali Summit, and then Bali Concord I was signed there, right? So we had the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in 1960s, 70s. We were, you know, it was a very sensitive time in the region. So it was great that we hammered out a hard law, a Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. Then in softer forms of cooperation, we outlined it in our Bali Concord I, and we also formalized, you know, the emerging norms of the ASEAN way. So if we were to say that, hey, you know, rule of law, rules-based community, why is it so hard to get law going? I think it's good to know what our history is. ASEAN way, you know, all the way from 67, formalized in the TAC and Bali Concord I in 76. Consultation and consensus, cooperation, non-interference, non-use of force, non-legalistic means of working. Now, the ASEAN Charter has only about 10-12 years of existence, right? Yes? And, you know, as opposed to 40 years of flexible engagement. So 40 versus 10, we will need more time, but we cannot take too long. Yeah. So, moving forward, how did law, you know, become more and more important in the ASEAN region? Really, it was, I mean, you know, 1960s to the 1990s, all of us concentrated on nation building. You know, we became known as the Asian Tigers. Our economies were booming. We were growing, you know, into middle-income economies, and it seemed everything was great, right? But the Asian financial crisis came. And this is not my own theory. Many economists, political economists, IR people have seen that it was with the end of the Cold War, the start of, you know, negotiations for the world, for the WTO and GATT, and, you know, the financial crisis. All these external impacts made the ASEAN member states realize that, hey, we can't go it alone, and we need to go it together. And how do we do it together? We need some sort of rule, we need some sort of engagement with each other, and so we developed more laws, right? So these varied externalities, apart from the financial crisis, there was dot-com bubble, and then non-economic factors like SARS, and, you know, other sensitive points in our region, like South China Sea on human rights and transboundary pollution. All these come into play, right? And that gets us going. So, with all these external factors, where was the development of law? The beginning of the hard law in the region, right? I mean, Asian financial crisis only in 798, but we saw that towards the end of the Cold War, we already started moving into the region of hard law in the economic cooperation sphere. Yeah, in the summit in Singapore, and at that time, so the first summit was 1976. Now we have 2 summits a year, but in 1992, you know, a few years, well, not a few years, but, you know, from 76 to 1992, there were only 4 summits, right? So, you know, compare it to now. There was this economic emphasis in the 1990s, and we started having the ASEAN Free Trade Area Agreement, the CEPT, after. Yeah? And then throughout the 1990s, the CLMV countries joined up, and we had the ASEAN Vision 20 and Hanoi Plan of Action. So apart from the hard laws, we also had many, many soft laws just to get things going in the region, to cooperate. I would not say integrate, but to cooperate. Yeah? And all this led to, the development of the Bali Concord II in 2003 and subsequently in the ASEAN Charter. So we would like to think that the ASEAN Charter is totally novel, but actually the real developments were from the 1990s, culminating in the Bali Concord II, right? Another very important part of ASEAN's history. And then, but Bali Concord II, since it is a soft law, then the principles and the norms got codified in the ASEAN Charter of 2007. Of course, the ASEAN Charter also introduced new factors, but the substantive part of the ASEAN community, the vision came in the Bali Concord too. So, in the 1990s, well, when you get a copy of the slides, you'll see, there were so many treaties, there were so many economic treaties. If all these were implemented in the 1990s, we would definitely be able to compete with China and India now. Yeah, right? Yeah, 1990s. At that time in the 1990s, China was still developing. We would have a head start. Yeah. But now, okay, 2007, we restart our engine for integration and for people to prosper through the economic community. Right? The ASEAN Charter, and as Ambassador Ong has said, the Green Book and the 3 little books of the community blueprints. So what does the ASEAN Charter do or say? So it codifies all the ASEAN norms, rules, and values. It sets clear targets. It provides this legal status and institutional framework for ASEAN, and this was what Professor Cohen was saying. And so with this, ASEAN proclaimed that the Charter is this new legal framework with new organs, so laws implemented by institutions to help our community building process. Now, so what is the rationale, apart from competing with China and India? So it's more technical, right? So law and implemented by institutions, so rule of law, rules-based, rule of institutions. And the Eminent Persons Group said that the ASEAN Charter needs to make sure, or the adoption of the ASEAN Charter with this rules-based environment, we make sure that all ASEAN member states keep to our obligations, otherwise, game over. Yeah? And they said that we would put in dispute settlement and monitoring mechanisms to ensure adherence. So we will look at later whether and to what extent this dispute settlement mechanism or these monitoring mechanisms are effective in getting implementation, a rules-based community. And of course, very important for external relations, legal personality, credibility in the world, right? Who wants to engage with us if we don't have legal personality? We need to have legal personality, right? And in terms of, rules-based development, those who can go ahead first, go ahead. So decision-making, consultation and consensus, but in the economic sphere, we have ASEAN minus X. Yeah? And then the introduction, the first time of enshrining, human rights and democracy in hard legal obligations that came in the ASEAN Charter. And they re-emphasized that China and India external shocks really need ASEAN to cooperate. Yeah? So there we have it. In sum, all the substantive, procedural, and reputational changes were advocated, and they came into being in ASEAN. So we see all this, manifested in Articles 1 and 2 in the purposes and principles. Legal personality is asserted in Article 3, and then all the organs that will help to foster cooperation, integration, and implementation are in the Articles 7 to 15, decision-making and dispute settlement as well. But the funny thing is that apart from this ASEAN Charter being very important, but the execution of all this, right? Most of the details for how we get the action going across the 3 pillars of ASEAN are enunciated in the blueprints, right? And the blueprints are soft law, not binding. So in terms of law and institutions, what do we see? Some of these. We have enhanced commitment, we have new ASEAN bodies, we have more deputy secretary generals, we have enhanced powers for the secretary generals, and so on and so forth, and more ASEAN meetings. So we definitely do see many more ASEAN meetings because everyone is involved, right? But whether everyone is talking to everyone else for seamless cohesion and integration, that's a problem for bureaucracies everywhere, whether nationally, regionally, or internationally. So, as you go, there will be problems of coordination. So, in terms of the rule of institutions, what are we looking at? More or less the same, but then if you drill down, the functions are slightly different, right? So the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting, comprising foreign ministers, is now renamed Coordinating Council. There's the Community Council, there are sectoral ministerial bodies where they used to be, formal, but there wasn't a formalized name for them. But then the National Secretariat, Secretary General, and Secretariat remain the same. They do a lot of the work of ASEAN. And we have the new body of the Committee of Permanent Representatives. And this is a diagram, I think I got this from the ASEAN website, where this is how everything fits in. Yeah? So ASEAN Summit of the leaders and the Coordination Council are the foreign ministers, right? And we have the SecGen and Secretariat, and then National Secretariats and the CPR. So, going back to Professor Cohen's question, what do we mean by being rules-based or having, the rule of law in ASEAN? And I concur with you. I mean, I totally agree with him. It's very simple. Okay, no matter what terminology. Well, obviously, since most of us are lawyers, in legal studies, rules-based and the rule of law mean different things. But in ASEAN, if we read the Eminent Persons Group report, the rule of law and being rules-based really means that law needs to be obeyed, we need to have better compliance. Simple as that. We need to implement, we need to comply. Yeah. But how do we get compliance really is so multifaceted. It's not only about institutions doing or officials doing, but it's about, let's start from the beginning. And it's not only about our attitudes, but it's about how law is being made, right? What types of law does ASEAN make? And does ASEAN, and does each ASEAN member state, and going down the bureaucracy, do all these levels of officials, do they all expect these laws to be obeyed? Do they expect the hard law to be obeyed, like the ASEAN Charter or the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement to be obeyed? And then what about the blueprints? Blueprints are pretty thick. Do they mean that every sector of the blueprint is to be implemented? We don't know. We hope that, with the treaty obligation, everybody is committed to compliance. But with the blueprints, when it's soft law, what level of compliance are we looking at, right? But generally speaking, in the ideal world and in the mind of the Eminent Persons Group, and during the time of the signing of the ASEAN Charter, yes, we want law to be obeyed, hard laws, and the expectation that soft laws of ASEAN, all our declarations, codes of conduct, blueprints, whatever, they need to be implemented, they need to see results, right? So, we need to see results, but how do we make laws again? Not only in terms of hard law and soft law. So in terms of, overarching type of constitutional instruments of ASEAN, so I would like to say that the Bali Concord tool is, a constitutional moment for ASEAN, and this was executed by the Vientiane Action Program. Then the ASEAN Charter is definitely our constitutional moment and our constitutional treaty for the region, and it's executed by our roadmaps, by our blueprints. But then thereafter, we have certain important points that are, we don't sign treaties, but we sign soft declarations. But these soft laws, these declarations, have a very firm legal character. We would imagine that any type of constitutional or soft constitutional instrument really needs to be committed to and complied with, right? That's our expectation as lawyers. Maybe politicians, maybe diplomats would have a different idea. But as lawyers, I think the expectation is there. Okay? And in terms of how we make the laws, you know, all these blueprints, plans of actions, nobody monitored how they were implemented, what the achievement rate was, and it's very easy to adopt a big instrument and have, you know, an executing instrument. And if you don't meet these targets, oh, never mind, the next 5 years we can, oh, refresh it, right? Refresh, refresh, refresh. But then we add new things. Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm a lawyer and I want to see results, right? I mean, they're not, well, one has to be understanding of the region, but I mean, this is the truth, right? So we refresh. Then we ask ourselves, right? Soft laws for ASEAN, hard laws for ASEAN. So maybe the ASEAN way, you know, from 67, 76, on and so forth, we have this non-legalistic attitude, and soft law is our modality. Okay, that's fine, that's great. Soft law is our modality because it enables us to be flexible. It enables us to have a rule, you know, at least having a rule there better than nothing, right? Yeah, transaction costs, negotiations among the 10 member states are lower, right? So it enables us to have good things. So having soft law is great. But because, you know, it's not about the level of obligation, but it's about the level of implementation. So if we want to negotiate this soft law, then we make sure that we implement it and we see results. Otherwise, why do we have thousands of meetings to hammer out these soft laws, right? All professionals go to the meetings. You have, you know, you have your economic officers, you have your trade officers, you have your law officers, and then you have the ASEAN Secretariat officers, all coming in. Everybody's time is being expended making all these new laws and then refreshing them every 5 to 10 years. Wow. Yep. And why do we use hard law, right? And everyone thinks that, or rather in the world of international law and international relations, we are always told, classically, that hard law is the best. Okay, if we can get hard law, that would be great, right? Hard law and then compliance, implementation, and so forth. But if we are realistic about ASEAN, okay, maybe we can't get hard law all of the time. Where we're successful in hard law is economic agreements and ASEAN external economic agreements, or ASEAN external agreements, because our partners, our external partners, require this level of obligation and compliance from us. So if they could expect that of us, how come we can't expect it of ourselves, right? Apart from how we make law and refreshing and so on and so forth, I think looking at compliance and implementation, we need to understand why states, why we ourselves, you know, would obey international law or regional law or ASEAN law, right? So I think it needs to be seen, I think compliance is attractive when we see that it is in our best interest, right? So in ASEAN economic integration, we are all told, citizens all the way up to officials, we are all told that this is going to bring us benefits. But what type of benefits? And do these benefits get, you know, all these increments in the benefits get told to us? I think if we get some sort of transparency or some sort of data, oh, you know, we're getting more jobs for our people, our young people are, you know, going to school, they're getting access to the world, so on and so forth. And it's not just about GNP or GDP, but that GNP and GDP growth translates down to the people. That would really help in implementation and integration, right? So, and then at the meta-state level, economic reasons. At the international community level, reputation and credibility, why states would want to comply, right? Then, especially in the realm of human rights, pressure from the international community, and also, you know, CSOs, domestic transnational actors. In the economic sphere, if you do not comply with your international law, there could be reprisals. So imagine if in an ASEAN-China economic agreement, ASEAN violated one of the provisions. Would we expect China not to do anything? No, I think we would expect China to do something. Diplomatically or otherwise. right? And then, apart from that, in terms of carrot and stick, there is also law or rather legal compliance brings about some sort of normative change. I guess some of us in the region see this already. We believe in the system, we believe in ASEAN, we believe in ASEAN law and integration. I think many of us do, but many of us also don't, right? But it would be more powerful as we integrate in the region. So, I mean, talking about European comparison, so I have many European friends, right? And when the UK, voted for Brexit, so many continental Europeans were broken-hearted because and not at a state-to-state level or officials level. They just ordinary people. They would say, "Oh, I'm so heartbroken because there's this vision of Europe. We emerged from the ashes of the war. We're supposed to help each other, right? And there's this European community. There's this identity. This person-to-person or person-to-community type of identity." And they felt so hurt, and some were quite tearful actually. Yeah. So I mean, belief in the system. So there are varying degrees, and what do we believe in as an ASEAN people, right? And why do we obey international law? Well, for ASEAN states and ASEAN peoples to obey ASEAN law, it protects our interests, right? So other people see that, oh, we are a rules-based society, they can trust us. We have more credibility, they want to trade with us, they want to invest in us, right? And if we plug ourselves into the international legal community, it protects us as, well, we are made up of states of varying power, and if we plug into a rules-based rule of law, ecosystem, the rule of law will protect us in some way. Okay? Yep. So all these factors could apply to, across the three pillars of the ASEAN community. Now, so at the signing of the ASEAN Charter, or just before, so Ambassador Tommy Koh and a few other officials from Singapore wrote this piece, and they said that, and they relied on data from an Indonesian academic that said that in the past, only about 30% of ASEAN agreements had been implemented. So we don't know we don't know 30%, and everyone still uses this 30%, even though the charter has been around for 12 years, right? I mean, what's the data out there? What is our level of implementation now? Maybe it's time to stop take to see where we really are, right? And it's not only about the ASEAN Charter, but all our ASEAN, the important ASEAN instruments like ARTICA, so trade in goods agreement, the AKIA, the ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement, so on and so forth. And how do they benefit us, right? So, as Professor Cohen said, the EPG said, we have enough instruments, right? And what we need is this culture of honoring and implementing all the laws that we have, the hard laws and the soft laws. So the solution that the Eminent Persons Group came up with was to have dispute settlement mechanisms. So that was the primary solution that they had, and then they said it must include monitoring, and the Secretary General should be entrusted with the role of monitoring. That's very, very good. But we want to see, if your primary instrument of compliance is dispute settlement mechanisms, then have they worked? So in the ASEAN Charter, we have a very comprehensive dispute settlement mechanism framework, right? So in the first port of call, when you have a dispute, you have alternative dispute resolution. You do it by dialogue, consultation, negotiation, and all good officers, right? Then, if your instrument has a dispute settlement mechanism, you should use it. This really applies to the economic instruments, right? Not all ASEAN economic treaties have a dispute settlement mechanism, and because economic integration is going to bring us together, all three pillars, as a coherent community. They brought in the ASEAN, or rather they re-emphasized the 2004 ASEAN Protocol on the Enhanced Dispute Settlement Mechanism. So any type of economic treaty in ASEAN that does not have a dispute settlement mechanism, if there is a violation, we can rely on this. Okay? Then for peace and security type of disputes, we use the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. And if anything still falls by the wayside or falls through the cracks, we have this catch-all Article 25 of the Charter, where you have this dispute settlement mechanism for all other types of disputes, right? And if everything still remains unresolved, we can go to the ASEAN Summit. Then in Article 27, the ASEAN Secretary General is empowered to monitor compliance post, dispute settlement mechanism solutions. Now, we like to think that the monitoring powers of the Secretary General actually came with the ASEAN Charter, but no, actually, the monitoring powers of the ASEAN Secretary General were enshrined in the agreement to establish an ASEAN Secretariat. If I remember correctly, it's Article 11 of that agreement, of that 1976 agreement. So the monitoring powers have always been there, right? But whether and how, these powers have been allowed to, get very granular data from the monitoring processes, I think the states can facilitate and support, what they have signed up to, right? And one more thing to say is that none of these 1 to 6, right? None of the dispute settlement mechanisms in ASEAN has ever been used. So if we're looking for compliance, we're definitely now not looking at any of these 6, right? I'm not saying that they can't be used. As lawyers, we are always going to look for an opportunity for business, right? So, and there might be a unique opportunity where lawyers will see a chance to activate these mechanisms, but maybe not just yet. And I think we all need to educate ourselves more about ASEAN laws and how ASEAN dispute settlement mechanisms could work. Because this was the story of other regional organizations and regional integration processes as well. Because at the beginning, none of the lawyers knew how the laws work, how they could fit into the system. But then suddenly one day, a lawyer or a law firm saw an opportunity to activate a dispute settlement mechanism, and then all the lawyers came in and everybody became, experts in their own regional law. Right? So, are dispute settlement mechanisms and monitoring mechanisms really sufficient to ensure compliance? Well, in certain situations, yes. In certain situations, no. So in ASEAN, I guess the environment has not been conducive to the use of dispute settlement mechanisms yet, but the environment is growing for monitoring mechanisms. I will get to that later, right? But generally speaking, when would the environment be good for us, in ASEAN to use the dispute settlement mechanisms? When the countries want to use it, right? Because it increases our credibility of commitment. It shows the world that we have good faith. We show one another in the ASEAN 10 that we have good faith if we are willing to let an arbiter, decide on our dispute. And maybe, I'm not sure about this, so, please advise. Because they say, certain political scientists have said that going to court will neutralize politically sensitive issues. I'm not so sure this really works in the ASEAN situation or for every ASEAN situation, but, advise one another, right? But what Karen Alter has found is that, courts are very resource intensive. So there are capacity issues for compliance, is there a litigation culture? All this will have to be taken into account if we want to use dispute settlement mechanisms as a tool of compliance in ASEAN. Eric Voten has a more insightful factor to add. He says that we can get dispute 7 mechanisms to ensure compliance much better when private parties start using the courts. So now at the ASEAN level, all the agreements are only activated by the states. None of us as private citizens, or even if we own firms, as private parties, can use the court system. So at the national level, how can we read ASEAN laws into our national system and then go to the domestic court to litigate, right? If a customs official does not, so if I'm a trader and there is a customs official that has made a mistake in not letting my goods into like Singapore, into Indonesia, for example, and then I have an Indonesian business partner. The Indonesian business partner could rely on, Indonesia's commitment on ATICA, on a trade and goods agreement, to say, hey, customs official, you're wrong. Can you please look into this? And if it doesn't work, bring it to an Indonesian court. Then your Indonesian lawyers can come in, work it through, and we are going to have free movement of goods. We are going to have economic integration. Everybody, well, except for the poor customs official, right, would, in a simplistic sense, benefit. And once lawyers come in to see this, experts come in, economists will see, traders will see the benefits of, using courts to make sure that there is a flow of connectivity for their goods. That would really drive integration. Okay? So, apart from the dispute settlement mechanisms, as I mentioned, monitoring mechanisms now may be more helpful at this phase of ASEAN's growth, right? So who do we look to? The SG and the Secretariat, right? And what could it involve? Data collection and performance reviews, greater transparency and information sharing. So now there is this monitoring and evaluation framework, which I think is a real advantage and progress over the ASEAN Economic Community scorecard, right? And the region, through the summit meetings or the ministerial meetings, could, see where, with greater transparency, we would see where greater resources could be channeled so that, we can help one another implement better or comply better. And obviously there are other agencies like the LSAD in ASEAN, the CPR and the national secretariats could all play a very important role in enhancing compliance and in monitoring as well. Right? So enforcement and monitoring, the AEC. So it was part of the AEC Blueprint 2015. Then the scorecard was also in the AEC Blueprint 2015, and we have this monitoring and evaluation framework, which was from 2016 onwards, after the establishment of the ASEAN community. So this, although the M&E framework is for the AEC, but there is a monitoring unit in for all the 3 pillars of the ASEAN community, and that is an added advantage. I mean, it really is phenomenal. So the AEC, what were the flaws? So, if we have monitoring, we cannot have this type of monitoring. Okay? So with self-monitoring, self-reporting, there was no external, but that's okay. There are many systems like human rights treaties, reporting systems where it's self-reporting, right? But we need to be a bit more transparent so that there is peer pressure and some reputational pressure so that we can actually do our work of implementation. The AEC scorecard, there were 4 phases, but only 2 were publicly available. So I'm not sure why, but anyway. So in the AEC, I think this was the first AEC scorecard. So if we can see, in self-reporting, everyone gave themselves A for the first phase of the free flow of goods, right? Everybody, I don't know, how can we have such uniformity in everybody has an A, everybody has a B. It is incredible, right? Yeah, but there's no C. There's no C. And this is the first phase, right? First phase, and for transport, and of course we know that ASEAN connectivity is difficult. So wow, everybody gave themselves B. Well, yeah. I don't know, right? And let's look at this. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't see this very well. But for e-commerce at the early stage, everyone gave themselves A. And for taxation here, the line above the A's, only the ASEAN Secretariat gave itself a C. Everyone had an A for taxation, right? And yeah. So this is why if we want to have monitoring, it can't be like this. Yeah, right? Okay, so a better framework. This replaces the AEC scorecard, right, from 2016, and it produces, so there's more transparency to the public, to us, right? I think twice a year. In the ASEAN Economic Integration Brief, right? So there is more transparency, there's more stakeholder feedback, we're more engaged, and that is the intention of it, right? And it has 3 important parts, and this feeds into, the ASEAN Community 2025. That is for us, the good of for us as the ASEAN people, compliance monitoring. So we make sure that the AEC blueprint and the sectoral work plans are actually implemented, complied with. And, okay, so if you do, you must see results. So there's outcomes monitoring. When you do we see the intended results? So that is an important part of it. Then it becomes even more important to us, impact evaluation. If there are outcomes, is it only good at the macro level for like GNP, GDP, so on and so forth, or are we seeing broader socio-economic environments being improved? Are people getting jobs? Are salaries getting higher? Is there a wage disparity? Are income gaps being narrowed? All these are impact evaluations which are important for us if we as ordinary people are going to benefit from the rules-based ASEAN, right? So now we have the review system not more than every 3 years. So if it's 2016, so 2019. So I don't think it's out yet, or at least I don't know whether it's out, yeah. But when it's out, let's see whether it is going to be publicly available, well, even if it's not publicly available, I suppose there would be a leaked report. And I think it's in, no, not leaked report, but these reports are all circulated. Or at least, otherwise, how as experts, how do we work, right? And it's important because I think a lot of ASEAN data is not sensitive. It's not sensitive, right? And I don't think everybody is finger pointing to say, oh, you bad country. No, I think it's very supportive and facilitative in a way. Yeah, if we look at data in a neutral sense, right? And be adult about it or professional about it. And without, granular data, it is very, very difficult to improve. Because if we look at the AEC scorecard, we don't know which sectors. We know that everybody did it, but do we know that which department or which needs to be improved, which sector in the trade and goods needs to be improved? We don't, right? And how can we measure that all these outcomes, if we don't have the granular data, how do we know that our blueprint provisions are getting us all the outcomes and the impacts that we want? I think we really need to look more closely into this, right? So improvements in the next AEC phase. So it's not just about monitoring and implementation and so on and so forth. It's very important that we reach out to the private sector. And I think in the first blueprint, so the AEC Blueprint 2015, the private sector felt left out. And so this emphasis has come in very much in the AEC community, the AEC Blueprint 2025, where we have the private sector emphasis coming in, the SME, small media enterprises coming in, right? Not everybody is an MNC. And sometimes if it's an MNC, a multinational corporation, many times they might be an international MNC, right? So if we're going to grow our region, our businesses, our industries also need to be focused upon and also given the benefits of our integration, right? and I was talking about statistics and granular data, more information leads to greater efficiencies, right? And all this will bring ASEAN into a more integrated market. So now let's look at, apart from monitoring and lawmaking and so on and so forth, what other policy areas or strategic areas could impact on compliance or implementation? And not everything is about law, as we lawyers know. Yeah, it could be at a more macro level, right? Maybe we are very realist and self-interested, even though we still sign up to a bigger community. But then, as Ambassador Ong was saying, you have signed up for it already, so why, when there's a new agreement or in discussion to implement it, you say, we still have our national interest. But what about the time that you signed up to that treaty? You obviously saw that there were net gains in the longer term, right? So, I mean, in any integration process, there will be transitional pain, right? So, does a state, do the decision makers, want to take that bold step towards development? And of course, there are electoral politics which also play into, whether a state would want to take difficult steps towards greater integration. So all that is very complicated, yeah? But I think it would be good if we all saw what type of net gains we get from ASEAN integration, in the short term, medium term, and the longer term, and maybe also some sort of data. Nobody has done this study, but actually to see which and how every ASEAN member state will benefit from greater integration, and in which areas, right? Because every country stands to benefit a lot, I think, as a total block. And then there's the ASEAN way. So we have been talking about the ASEAN way, about sovereignty. And what is this thing about sovereignty? Why are we claiming that sovereignty when the treaty is being implemented, when it was actually an exertion of that state's sovereignty when you signed the treaty? So I assert my sovereignty in signing the treaty. How can you say that, I have lost my sovereignty? My sovereignty was there when I signed it, yeah? Now, there is path dependence, right? And this is very normal, right? This is very, very normal. We have been practicing non-legalistic ways, right? And we have many soft laws. And it didn't matter in the past, pre-charter, if we violated our own provisions. It's different now, yeah? So there's some sort of path dependence, It doesn't matter, but it does matter in the ASEAN Charter context. So this habituated practice will take some time. The more we practice law, the better we will move away. Our new path dependence will be implementation of law, right? Then we have also talked about this morning lower levels of the rule of law, lower levels of legalization and institutionalization. So as our countries grow, these get better, right? But we have to start somewhere. Ambiguity, better lawmaking needed, as Ambassador Ong was saying, or sometimes, the agreements, the English is not so good, some things are not so clear. We will get better, but we need to start making better laws. Then transparency, lack of information, and of course capacity. But as we grow, we will have more resources and capacity. Yeah, weak rule of law at national and regional level, so that ties into that. And overall, do we actually believe in the ASEAN system? So, if we really want to have the ASEAN community, I think we need to examine ourselves. And it's a political issue, it's a strategic issue, but it's also a very legalistic and technical issue. So many facets to it, and I think if we can make integration more attractive, benefits of integration more attractive to the ASEAN members and the ASEAN countries, I think we might be able to see better